I am so thrilled to have two folks with us today, Doug Harrison and Jared Auclair, who I really admire and respect so much and have loved partnering with both of them. So Jared and I have long been partners, and he's at Northeastern, where he has held a variety of leadership roles that have led to some of the innovation that's happening at Northeastern. He's currently the Dean of the College of Professional Studies at Northeastern. But before that, for the last 10 years, he was Vice Provost for Research of Economic Development, Director of Bioinnovation, Associate Dean in the College of Science. He's had a lot of kind of interdisciplinary perspectives around research innovation and access. He helped shape initiatives like Plus One, which is a program that enables students to earn both a bachelor's and master's at the same time in 5 years. And he's very focused on expanding opportunities that meet learners where they are and preparing them for what's next. So Doug is also amazing. I think we first came across each other when he was at University of Maryland Global Campus, where he founded the School of Cybersecurity and Information Technology. He's currently dean of the division of, or he leads the division of applied undergraduate studies at NYU's School of Professional Studies. Um, you'll see a theme there because I think a lot of the real action on college campuses today are happening in schools of professional studies. Um, so Doug is an internationally recognized expert on trans-Appalachian white gospel music. Is that cool or what? And he wrote a book, Then Sings My Soul, The Culture of Southern Gospel Music. He's also published and presented widely on access and inclusion in online learning, assessment security, and academic integrity. And he's a past director on the board of the International Center for Academic Integrity, and he's on Turnitin's a customer advisory board around AI. And he's won a bunch of awards, including the John Kluge Residential Fellowship at the Library of Congress and NEA's Award on Excellence in the Academy. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about these two, but I'm going to stop talking and let them speak for themselves. So we'll start with Jared. How'd you get into this particular area? What got you interested here? Because obviously you could do anything you want in higher ed.
Perhaps. Thanks, Carrie. Great to be with you, and Doug to be with you also. It's an interesting path that I took, right? I think I was trained as a classical scientist or chemist, and then moved through different positions at Northeastern. And as I moved through those positions, I built my own teaching slash learning pedagogy, which is my favorite because when they ask you to write your first teaching statement, I'm like, I don't know anything about teaching. 10 years later, I have some very strong opinions, as you know. So it's
Yeah.
all good. But really, all of these things really cemented for me as I really started to think about the role of academia in economic development and integration into communities, and what are the real what the purpose of a university is in the long run, right? It's about helping students get skills to get jobs. And
Right.
how do we do that at a larger, more equitable scale, to drive in the space that I spent a lot of time thinking about was regional economic development. And of course, myself and the university thinks across the entire globe regionally. So, uh, it all came to fruition in my analysis and writing of a Build Back Better regional challenge grant back 3 or 4 years ago, where I sort of fleshed out all those ideas and then keep building on them and talking to interesting people, cool people like you both, and helping inform where I think we need to go.
That's awesome. Doug, what about you? How'd you get from gospel to
Yeah,
how
right.
from Appalachia?
Right. I think like many of the students that we encounter in, the schools of professional studies world, and, you know, uh, my career has been many chambered and had many seasons. And um, I myself am a first gen low income student for whom higher education was sort of um, the transformative thing that really launched me into you know a career and stability in the middle class. And I think as as my career evolved. I think I had the good fortune to have mentors and opportunities that really showed me the power of not just higher education as we conventionally understand it, but to think about what are the levers and mechanisms that post-secondary institutions can activate to really drive socioeconomic mobility for, especially for those populations who've been historically shut out of access to opportunity, not just education, but college and career. And I really found that while I loved the work I did as an English professor and a gospel music guy, I really feel like the impact of what I can contribute in trying to create these alternative pathways and reimagining college and career, the impact there for me is just very rewarding to work with the populations of students for whom the multiplier effect of post-secondary credentials is just so much more exponential than those students who have the fortune and privilege of coming to college with the educational and social and economic capital to succeed in the traditional ways that we have conventionally constructed post-secondary experiences. And so I found the work just really validating and rewarding, and I hope Jared is exactly right. I think we need to say early and often in higher education that helping artist learners get good jobs that create middle class sustainability and generate intergenerational wealth, that is not a bad thing. That's something we should be proud of, because that's what leads to economic and social stability and ultimately national security for free societies. And that's what I find really validating about this work.
That's awesome. And you know what? What I love, both of you are sitting in institutions where you've got lots of students who come from very high socioeconomic um, uh, environments, but both of your institutions and you personally, both of you are very, very focused on improving access to higher education to not that to students who have a lower socio economic startup and helping create new pathways. So I'm Donald, we're going to hold off for your question in a few minutes. I'm going to start with, we're going to have before we get into the whole discussion, I'd like to have a little Padlet and hear from you, from all of you here. So Kelly and Brett, could you take that away? And
Great.
the Padlet is, yeah,
Oh,
Brett.
yeah, thanks, Carrie. So the link to the Padlet is in the chat. And so if you click on that, you'll go to the Padlet in your own browser. And I'll pull that up on the main screen in just a moment, but I'll leave it here for folks that might be using the QR code. So I'll wait a few more seconds and then I'll jump into the Padlet live on the screen here. As you go to the Padlet, just look at the first two columns, 1A and 1B. We just have a quick poll and then a quick response there where we want to kind of do a pulse check with you as we go into the session.
Okay,
And the poll should be pretty straightforward. You'll click the one response that best matches your thinking at the moment. And then for the second column, you can click the plus icon at the bottom of the screen. And I'll go there now and be able to orient anybody that needs that. And we can see that people are coming into the Padlet, and we'll start seeing the results here as I refresh. And for the poll in the first column, I'll show the results as we wrap up in a minute.
yeah, please answer.
And then go ahead and go to 1B when you're ready.
That's really interesting about the poll. We're seeing a kind of a broad span of all four of those responses. So, what's most important change institutions must make to better serve modern learners? Engagement and motivation. involve students in the conversations about change. So, it's interesting. We hear, we support over 60 institutions at Alchemy, and we hear all the time that engagement is the biggest challenge right now. And how do we engage the modern learner? How do we create a more engaging? And Jared and I have gotten into lots of conversations about it because both of us feel that part of it is changing the way you assess, because assessing is engaging, but we'll get into that. But anyway, question here, how can all higher ed institutions effectively integrate alternative learning pathways such as micro-credentials or competency-based education into existing degree frameworks without compromising academic standards? And I think that's something we will definitely be addressing in our conversation today. What else? Meet them where they are. Micro-credentials to improve to employers, graduates have soft skills. We did a podcast a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, about micro-credentials and about like and one of the things that came up at that time was the lack of employer acceptance of these of stackable or smaller credentials. And we're seeing a definite increase in that, I think. And I'll be interested to hear what others here have to say. So please weigh in on the chat and Jared and Doug. Do you want to show the poll? I think we're pretty much finished with it.
Yeah, just got the poll results up there, Carrie.
Okay. I don't know. For some reason, I can't see him. So, I can see him over here. Yeah.
Maybe it didn't refresh on your end.
So limited funding or operational resources. Uh-oh. The theme of the year in higher education. The theme of life, but for certainly this year with all the hullabaloo. And that's certainly something, but one thing we are seeing that's related to that is just that there's like this I'm seeing a huge uptick on need for new revenue in institutions, and then similarly trying to find more efficiencies in infrastructure costs around creating that revenue. So the next one that came up was a kind of common, like all the rest, the other three were all pretty much got about 21, 22%. So uncertainty around learner needs and or employer demand, and then policy accreditation or system inflexibility, and finally faculty or stakeholder resistance. So let's get off the Padlet and poll and get right into it, and with our panelists. So this first question, I'll start with you, Doug. At a high level, what do you think is most important when it comes to serving today's modern learner?
Well, I think we really have to understand that they're seeking the concept of reskilling and upskilling, that the need for a post-secondary credential is being driven by some career aspirational goal. And so understanding what that is, that just means not only understanding the profile of that learner, right? That they're almost always on the job. They're almost always at least somewhat older than a traditional first-time full-time high school graduate in post-secondary learning, though that age is coming down. It was coming down even before the pandemic, but it's averagely at least coming down even more quickly now post-pandemic. And I don't know if we're entirely sure why that is, but I think it's an interesting question we want to think about. And then understanding, right, that for most of what we're kind of calling the modern learner, the largest population here is some college and no degree. Right? So they've had multiple unsuccessful attempts at credential completion at a post-secondary institution, sometimes more than one. And so that means we have to be very attuned to what not just transfer credit looks like, but also know that there's a lot of other kinds of prior learning that's going on with these learners, and that we need to be attuned to how we structure our policy and our pathway constructs or the architecture so that we can maximize our ability to validate and award credit for that prior learning. I think there's often a deficit model conversation that happens with the population of students who are in the degree completion or some college no degree world, as if there isn't any cultural or economic or professional capital. There's a ton. It's just not recognizable or legible in the way that we conventionally think about it in higher education. And so our obligation really as institutions is to leverage our ability to understand all the different pathways and prior learning, which can include but exceeds transfer credit, and really leverage ways to lower cost and accelerate time to degree in a curriculum that is really skills-based, right? It has to be skills aligned, and we can talk more about that employer post-secondary gap that was coming up in some of the poll responses. But those are really critical components, I think, of understanding the modern learner and meeting them where they are.
That's great. I'm going to come back to this prior learning credit, but
Yeah.
Jared, I'd love to hear your thoughts on at a high level, what's most important.
I mean, I think, I agree with everything Doug said. I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting for when I think about modern learners and in general, for me, it's an opportunity to re-envision higher education writ large, because I think modern learners post high school aren't all wanting to be residential college students. Like, that's just not the reality. And we're leaving those people out. And I would argue that the people who, the traditional person that you think about going to a four-year college who lives on campus is there for a whole bunch of other reasons that the people that I'm trying to help are. So modern learners are all ages, right? It also goes to really thinking about what higher education has to offer. The modern learner knows what they want, and they want good return on their investment, right? And how do we achieve that? And how do we think about that? And how do we give them that? Right. And the days of, for me, the days of any learner, in particular the modern learner, coming to listen to me talk to my poor PowerPoint slides is dead. Like, that died through COVID. It should have been dead before that, but there's no point in that. And frankly, you can get, why did people come to university in the early 1900s and before, or even the 70s and before? To get information, because you couldn't get it someplace else. I had Encyclopedia Britannica at my house, and that's where I got information. I can go to Google or ask ChatGPT and get information. For us, it's to figure out how we help students translate that knowledge into action, doing something with the things that we're teaching them. I am all about, as Doug said, I am all about many things, including skills that lead to jobs, but more importantly, lead to careers. The way I think about the modern professional is you have a mosaic of different jobs. Education, especially for the modern learner, should also take that mosaic approach, birth to earth learning, integrated into your career. So that you can keep coming back for skills and credentials that you need to be successful. And PLA, prior learning assessment, which is a weird name for credit for other things, is crucial, but I also lean into, credit for work. If the modern learner is doing work all day long, why shouldn't I give them credit for that? I'm maybe too liberal for my own institution, but I would also argue that it should be free credit for work as opposed to charging them tuition for that. But that's
100%, Jared. And I mean, I'm at the risk of interrupting. I want to
please
say absolutely. And apprenticeships, right?
Love.
That's a hard nut to crack, especially in the U.S. But in sort of this both and model, absolutely. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about how we do. And I entirely agree with you about not charging. I think it's immoral that we charge students to prove for us to prove to them that we will give them credit for that thing that they've already done because they know and have done it. So I 1000% double click on that.
Yeah, you're getting the
thumbs up.
The thumbs up, and I think you're getting a lot more.
By the way, Doug, before Carrie goes to her next question, apprenticeships to me in the US are largely a missed opportunity, and taking it from I support apprenticeships in the life sciences. So I don't own the registered apprenticeships, somebody else does, but I do the technical training. I want my college to get in the business of owning registered apprenticeships, because I think that's important. And we'll get there. And then we can give credit for that work that can translate in. And then they can stack, right? But I think there's a huge opportunity to really think about how we re-envision. I'm not going to take us down this road totally, because it's not the point of the conversation, but re-envision apprenticeships, because even if you think about an apprenticeship as an electrician, it's also very technology focused these days. They plug in a computer and do a bunch of, so we can really think about how higher education can integrate and add value in that space without sort of dominating that space.
Yeah, and sorry, Carrie, I think we're totally hijacking your conversation already, but I would just say,
keep going, go.
we launched our first 3 apprenticeship associate's degrees in the last 2 years. And I think you're exactly right about, you know, it's not just how do you construct that pathway in terms of, you know, identifying the competencies from the job structure and making sure you can map that into a credit-bearing credential, but there's also a whole component of partnership enablement, right? Of working with employers, of supporting supervisors, because, you know, you're really in partnership with them as someone who's, you know, really doing the work of mentorship and professional development and skill and competency assessment. And that's just a whole new way for, or a foreign way for most of community colleges. I think have been doing this better, but I think if you think about the kind of institutions that you and I are at, I certainly find that it's a mind shift that is happening. There hasn't been resistance to it, but it certainly is a new, if we think about the modern learner, that's a whole new way for a post-secondary institution to think about existing and operating.
You know, it's
100%.
funny.
And I think that's right.
Keep going.
Go ahead.
Go, Jared.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, you know, for institutions like mine and maybe others like mine, you know, we always think about, I don't, because I don't actually care, but we think about brand and what that looks like in brand. And I think you can be both and as an institution. And I'm going to let Carrie talk in 1 second, but before I forget to say this, Doug, when NU Northeastern comes to New York, let's find ways to partner.
Yep, absolutely.
That sounds great. I think, yeah, my question, I want to follow this apprenticeship and also prior learning credit a little bit further. Two things. One is a comment and then the next is a question. So the comment is that our company does a lot of field placement for clinical professions. Okay, that's one of the services we provide. And do you see a more formalized, structured approach like a field placement approach for the creation and site development? I mean, so we look at that as from site development to supporting the learner, matching them to the proper thing. Do you see that as part of kind of the future as schools, institutions really expand out the apprenticeship opportunities? Do you see that as a more formalized kind of thing that an institution would do?
I mean, I think well, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm going to answer the question I think I'm hearing, which is right now we're in the apprenticeship space is so sort of immature in the US in a way that it isn't, say, in Europe, that it's really, I think, forming at a kind of regional ecosystem level. And so in New York, in the New York region, for instance, the mayor's office and the public schools, and things like the CEO Jobs Council that JP Morgan Chase started, employer coalitions, CBOs, we're all sort of trying to figure out who's doing what in terms of like pipelining students into this. And so right now we're relying on an intermediary model where higher education largely works with someone like CareerWise or Reviture or Open Classrooms, these intermediaries that have a kind of, they put together pathways, they go recruit and source, if it's a site placement, to your point, and then they work with the post-secondary institution to say, okay, here's the mapping from the boot camp curriculum that we provide and the workplace learning that they'll be doing up to a point, and then there'll be this handoff. And that's helpful, but it also has its limitations. It has its challenges, because you're really reliant on the intermediary as a kind of pass-through to your partnership with the employer. And that partnership is really critical because the employer has to understand and trust that what the learning and the validation of that competency and skill development on the job is translating into a credential when and if the learner comes to you that they can trust. And so I think I think this is a pretty emergent space. I think, Jared, you mentioned this, but I think universities have to think about, do they themselves want to be the registered apprenticeship provider? And of course that comes with resource investment to do all the kinds of things, Carrie, that you're talking about, that you all provide a service for. If the university wants to get in that business, that's a whole set of skills and capacities that it just does not have, typically. And so I think it's a question.
I think it's a great point. I think it's a question I asked myself, right? And to your point, Doug, one of the reasons I am interested in sort of the bureaucracy around owning a registered apprenticeship, if you will, and paperwork is for that direct contact to the employer. I think the way in which I'm operating in supporting our apprenticeship programs right now, we're in the middle, and our partners deal with that piece, the recruitment and the employer and the student, which is fine. It works for me in what I'm doing at the moment, but I think there's opportunity beyond that. And I think the apprenticeship model is important, and people throw around the word apprentice all the time. And there's a difference between a registered apprentice and what some people do in an apprenticeship space. All that to say that I like the apprentice model, but it doesn't necessarily need to only exist in the context of a registered apprenticeship, right? Like I believe in breaking the bachelor barrier. Every job doesn't require a bachelor's degree. Every job doesn't require a PhD. And how do we think about what that looks like in terms of skills? And I think about this in the clinical space, right? You maybe need a certain accreditation to go be a med tech and process some sample. Well, that accreditation is awesome. Why don't I, as an institution, say that accreditation is worth this? And then if a student comes to me, I give them that plus the credit for their work, and then say, here's your pathway forward. Right. It needs to, it's almost like, in the age of AI, it should be even more possible to have really personalized learning pathways for each individual. The same thing that makes me crazy about my own kids in my life, my own children in dealing with their education, right? We talk about IEPs and individualized educational plans. That to me is crazy. Every single person learns differently. We should all have our own IEP to make us successful. And that's not scalable. I'm not so naive to think it is, but we could really think about what that means and how technology can enable that.
I mean, that particular issue came up in like more than half the meetings that I had at ASU GSV this week. It's like, okay, now we're in the world of AI. Okay, it's not going away. So how do we evolve to personalize the experience? And certainly, the technology and the tools like the learning management system aren't going to help, right? I mean, and that's kind of where the conversation was. But I'm going to come back to a question before, and I want to answer some of the questions that some of our participants have asked. But I have a question that I just want to say, what advice do you have? I want to come back to this whole prior learning experience and, enabling the modern learner to attain and even credits that they've gotten in 3 different community colleges, right? So what advice do you have for other institutions that are really trying to look at this, trying to find ways to create new pathways and to make sure that they're giving students appropriate credit for prior learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, we all need to remember why we do the things that we do, and that's for the student and all the things that Doug mentioned at the onset, and socioeconomic mobility and career growth, et cetera, et cetera. So that should always be the North Star. And then not being afraid to sort of to figure it out and to challenge the system and the norm, right? One of the things that, we deal with PLA and work for credit is, our accrediting bodies sometimes make that difficult. Oftentimes the reality is the interpretation of what the accredited body is, we think the accrediting body is saying is limiting that. In reality, they're not. So all that to say, just do it, as Nike might encourage.
Just do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, first of all, it's understanding. I mean, we talk about the modern learner, but the reality is here, like, what does that mean in terms of at an almost like an enrollment management perspective? What are the subsections and the subpopulations of that modern learner group, which are diverse, and it's not monolithic or purely one thing or another, but what do they need? And so that's a question of modality. That's a question of design. It's a question of cost, and yes, prior learning. I think I'm not going to do it right now, but I've seen multiple times already in the chat the question of faculty culture and resistance. We probably should come back to that
that's going to be the next conversation.
But I think then then it's a question of design and saying, okay, what are the multiple access pathways? How do you construct those, right? And so at UMGC, for instance, when we founded the School of Cyber and IT. Now, cyber is I think a particularly good example, but also kind of rare in industry in the fact that it has it has just been built from the ground up around industry recognized credentials that really are an architecture that shows you what a career pathway along a job structure looks like through industry certifications. But that's a good example of where there are industry certifications. We built all of our curriculum to align at every course. We started with A+ and went to Sec+ and then Net+. Every one of those courses along that curriculum was aligned to a certificate. So we could not just say to the learner, when you complete this course, you will be ready to sit for that exam and succeed if you are successful in the course, but with the other way around too. If they already had that certificate, because many people are already working in the industry, right? They're getting these. We gave them credit for that course and they didn't have to take that course. And so those kind of moves when we, and so I think to me, that's kind of like, to Jared, to your point, that to me is sort of big A apprentice, right? I mean, that's a way of recognizing work that's already happened, it's already been validated, and that we don't have to tell the student, you've got to take this course again because we're providing it, right? Those are, I think, again, not because that's going to be possible in every industry, because not every industry builds out certifications in that way, but where they do exist, that's, for instance, one architectural opportunity. And then also, as I said, modality is a key thing, right? We run courses in face-to-face, online synchronous, online asynchronous, flexible 7-week terms for our online courses because our learners tell us that that's important for them. So it's thinking about what are the different, not just policy, but also just sort of practical architectural and design models. And then of course there's the instructional design that of course Alchemy is our leader on.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I love this whole flexibility thing is just going to be just so important. And I love the way that you guys are framing everything right back to the learner, because that's where it all comes to. But the elephant in the room it keeps coming up in these questions has to do with traditional standing faculty. And in fairness to traditional standing faculty, they've had a lot put on their plates as the world has moved from primarily lecture-based face-to-face with the PowerPoints, Jared, to a world where you need to manage courses that are a hybrid. NYU has tons of high flex, right? Where some students can helicopter in and others are in the room. And then of course a lot of asynchronous and asynchronous online. So, and I like, I'm gonna broaden it out in a minute and to address the question that was asked earlier by Jamie Kelly, but starting with what you were just talking about, John Lynch had a question about it. In the time of scarce resources, faculty resist any assignment of resources or authority outside of the core academic experience. At four-year colleges, how do we make that case? And even at two-year colleges, I personally, is there a way to sustainably involve faculty in the creation, maintenance of the apprenticeship programs or model without just making them an administrator?
So I think
Yeah.
I'm going to say all the bad things and kind of get myself in trouble, and that's just how I roll. So I think there's a couple.
That's why you're here.
I think fundamentally, when you think about faculty, first of all, there's teaching faculty that are generally, but sometimes are tenure track, but generally are non-tenure track. There's research faculty, there's tenure track faculty who do both. There's the clinical faculty, there's all kinds of faculty. So take this with a grain of salt. Fundamentally, when the most resistance I get is from the more traditional tenured faculty who are trying to engage. My college is actually built on all non-tenure track faculty, teaching faculty. I can essentially lead them along to where I want to go, and we can do that in partnership. But when you think about the more traditional faculty, it's all about the reward structures needing to change, and thinking about what the institutions value and how you're rewarded for the work you do. I mean, as a life scientist, right? Publish or perish, grants, that's really fundamentally, historically, largely what we're evaluated on, and teaching is oftentimes secondary, right? That's a problem. And so that means faculty don't, like when I try to get faculty to engage with me on apprenticeships or things like that, it's very hard because it's not part of their reward structure. They get no quote unquote credit for that. So why would they do it? And really thinking about how we bring them into the fold in a constructive way is what I've been thinking a lot about, and how we reward teaching and different models of engaging learners. And again, keeping the learner at the forefront. I mean, I think there's tons of opportunities to really change the way that we operate from a faculty perspective within higher education, and try to be successful. I would also argue, just because I want to be super controversial today, I'm not a lover of tenure, and I think it served a really important purpose in the past. Maybe it serves a really important purpose now. I'm not sure that it's clear that that's the same purpose that it was intended for, and how we can fix that. Because I think we've run into a situation where expectation of faculty on administrators, I'm an administrator, it also makes things a bit challenging because they're unaligned with the reality of the university. Frankly, sure, it's a place to learn, but it's a business.
Yeah, so 100% on all of that. I think schools of professional studies, to your point earlier, Carrie, are often the incubators within especially larger research universities, and especially private universities, because we do tend to have a more flexible and I will say modernized faculty model. And that's certainly the case here. We have a core of full-time contract faculty, what some places will call teaching faculty, even though they have a full span of expectations. And we largely rely on practitioners for our delivery. And our students tell us that's what they want. They want people who are doing the job that they're also teaching. And so we see a lot of value in that model. Let me say, before I'm going to actually maybe Carrie take a freelance on a question I see in the chat, but before I do that,
Good, please do.
About unions. I had so when I came into this role 2 years ago and engaged my faculty, my full-time faculty, who had some ways to go in many cases to understand the model that we're trying to. And so we engaged in a year-long process of really just talking about what is our job, what is the mandate before us, and what do our learners look like. And so we spent a lot of time looking at research, looking at data. EAB and UPSIA and other organizations can really help here in terms of just helping you understand. The modern learner sounds like a thing, but like, what does that really mean under the hood, just in terms of those subpopulations and pathways and what they tell us they need and want. And really, at the end of the day, we just had to say, look, this is who we serve. And the incentive structure then that I try to create with my faculty when I'm just finishing up faculty annual reviews right now, is to incentivize, to say part of, it's a value of what we're doing to do work-based learning. And so helping us evaluate apprenticeship credit, for instance, is understood as part of what is in scope for your teaching, your non-instructional teaching responsibilities. Now, that doesn't always, I haven't yet chosen to bring out the stick on this for people who don't want to do it. But then we've built a whole team of non-faculty program administrators who help us do things like initial credit evaluation and employee and partnership enablement and engagement. And so you have to find the coalition of the willing, even though I know that phrase is mildly problematic for those of us who lived through it all those years ago. And then honestly build the team around it that you need. The final thing I will say is I also brought to campus Brian Rosenberg, who's former president of Macalester College and now is at Harvard in the education school. And he wrote a book, Whatever It Is, I'm Against It, Resistance to Change in Higher Education.
Great book.
I would recommend it to everyone, whether you identify yourself as someone who's a resistocrat by nature, or if you understand yourself to be someone who wants to change those cultures. Because unionization, I think, and finally, Carrie, I'll stop talking in just a second, is really, that's a thing now in higher education, right, among faculty. I've been part of a faculty union. I've been on a board of trustees that had to be management with, CBA negotiations. So I've seen a lot of these different perspectives. I actually think that while among administrators, unions tend to cause us to cringe sometimes, just because of the complication in employee relations that they can be perceived to bring, I actually think that they are often driving some of the changes to the points that Jared was making about faculty relationship to and the obstacle that sometimes those more traditional perspectives can be to the kinds of changes we're talking about. Unions can actually help us recalibrate and reimagine how the relationship of faculty to the ways that we construct pathways for modern learners. And so I actually see it as a potentially positive impact on our ability as institutions to move some of these needles.
That's right. I think also when you think about the book, which I enjoyed very much, I think another thing that's interesting to think about in the push on faculty, if you will, is the whole idea around shared governance, right? And shared governance only orchestrated by faculty is frankly nuts to me. Like, why is staff not involved? My college switched before I joined to a shared governance model that's faculty and staff driven, right? But the faculty don't understand it still and don't get on board, and I have a hard time getting the staff to engage, because they also my faculty have like a 80-10-10, right? 80 teaching, 10 service, 10 a scholarship, right? Anything I ask staff to do is extra, and I'm not paying them extra. So it's this weird dynamic in higher education, but I think that's interesting. The other thing that I'll say that I think is really interesting to think about in the context of this conversation with higher education in general, and I get yelled at for this all the time, because most people will say that our customer is a student, whereas I might argue that that's not. I might argue I might say that's okay, but in reality, my customer is industry, and the student is our product. And if we don't do a good job of giving them the skills they need to be successful in industry, then industry's not going to hire them.
Yeah, I mean, okay, there's a couple of issues that came up that I'd like to come back to later, but one is the idea of the institution as a business, and on the other one is this whole idea. Well, our Argentinian colleagues are you practicing holograms of teachers, or do teachers necessary? But let's come back to that later. I want to just take a moment. One of the reasons I invited both of you in here is that you're doing interesting things and you're creating different pathways. So I thought maybe it would be a good time for each of you to share for a few minutes about some of the different types of pathways that you're creating for modern learners. So maybe Jared, you want to start, because I know you're doing various different ones. Both of you are doing cool stuff.
Sure, happy to start. Let me just start by saying this is fundamentally what I believe in: articulated and actualized learning pathways for all learners that are skill-based, credentialed, stackable, and work integrated. Fundamentally, that's what I'm trying to do across the board in higher education and in my college. And when I think about that, and when I think about that, the pathways that we create, that we want to engage in, to the mosaic of learning approach and a mosaic of in a career, has to have on and off ramps that are articulated. People can see what the pathways are, because what we find is that many of our students that we engage in stacked credentials prior to a bachelor's degree just can't see themselves spending 4 years in school or 2 years in school. So we got to sort of build it in pieces. So the example that I spend a lot of time building is we do outreach and engagement. You don't get the students to understand what's possible, they won't ever be able to pursue it. I'm a life scientist. Everybody knows what it means to be a medical doctor in Massachusetts, where biotech is a huge part of our economy. Most people don't know how to enter the field, right? So at the eighth through 12th grade, we go and do professional development for teachers. We say to the teacher, here's what we taught you, now put it in the classroom as a lab, if you will. Those things, then we talk to those students about joining our apprenticeship programs and becoming an apprentice in the life sciences. Or if that's not for you, we have workforce development programs that are 8 weeks, and then we help facilitate job placement for you, right? In both of those cases, we give credit. The student can then take a number of different forks in the road. Maybe you just go work and you're happy forever, or maybe you want to come back and get an associate's degree, which we can help facilitate through the community college system. Or maybe you want to come and we gave you credit for your apprenticeship. Okay, great. You want to do a degree completion bachelor's right away, we can help you with that. Or if you take the associate's degree path, then you can come back later for a degree completion bachelor's, right? It's all about, and then you can do a master's and a doctorate if you want over time. But fundamentally, what it's all about is the things we've been talking about. We focus on the skills. What are the skills that we're teaching you so that you can apply them in the workforce? Sure, we give you the theory behind it, but it can't be theory only. We give you credit for work where we can, or prior learning assessment for other things you've done. We really articulate stackability and learning is a journey over one's life, birth to earth, like I said before, and then make it accessible to everyone, right? I think, and micro-credentials, sure, are a challenge in some industries, getting them to recognize them. I fight this fight in the life sciences in particular, because it's not natural to what we do. To the point where I've decided I'm going to give nano credentials. I'm going to teach you how to operate this piece of equipment, the skills you need to do that. That's going to stack into a micro credential. That's going to stack into a third of a course to a course, and so forth. So really breaking it apart so it's in small digestible chunks for people is really what I've focused a lot on. Systems probably exist. We don't really have the systems right now at the university to put all those pieces together, but because it's a complex landscape that we want to engage the learner in, that has to be malleable. They have to be able to touch it and understand it. And those are the things but that's an example of some of the things where we're really focusing on and trying to drive forward, while at the same time getting industry to understand the micro-credential, in our case, a badge, which is validated by the university. We say you have these skills, we assess them, you can do it. And we could talk about assessment another day, but is really important, as opposed to just listing on your resume, like, what can you do? And here's this rando list of stuff, which means I also think the resume should evolve so that it's a living portfolio or a living document with links and all kinds of other things. But again, that's one story.
I want to have a webinar sometime on the dinosaurs of higher education, and to me, a transcript is one of them.
100%.
And the other one that has come up in this conversation a lot here is the credit hour. Anyway, Doug, what?
Yeah. So I mean, basically everything Jared said. That's all the things that we are also doing. So I won't perseverate too much on that, other than just to reiterate the question of stackability and paths in and out, and the interoperability, if you will, of credit and non-credit experiences, so that there are options for our learners who sometimes need to step out or want to, because they've gotten what they need. But then we give them other ways to continue learning to meet whatever professional goals they have, and that those experiences talk to each other in terms of transferability, time and cost, and of course modality, which we've talked about a lot. So I'm not going to say all the things that Jared just said, because he said them very well, and they're what we're doing. So
Yeah.
Yes, I will give you one example of, so what we're trying to think about to the question of skills is really what does it mean to lean into work-based learning as a model? And so it's that college and career, not either or. And so we think a lot about how do we, first of all, when we're the Division of Applied Undergraduate Studies, so we try very hard for our courses, our regular courses, to have, to be applied learning, authentic assessments, if you will, if you're in that sort of world. And giving students as many various ways to also, around the classroom, engage in work-based learning that they can demonstrate having done the thing. And so, of course, we do co-ops, of course we do internships, of course we do work study. But for many of our students, that's not always possible, because they're already working. Many of them have childcare, elder care, housing or economic insecurity issues that just make it impossible to engage in an internship, even if it's paid. And so one of the things that we're doing, one of the ways that we're trying to expand pathways to accessing work-based learning, is that we are currently building, and we will launch an MVP of this product later this spring, is an online portal, a marketplace essentially of work-based learning, problems drawn from industry-defining employers, along job structures that are both in demand and in need for workforce development and aligned to our curriculum. And a student can come in outside of the classroom, check that problem out. We will give them a coach, an industry coach, to help them solve that problem. And then they can build a portfolio of work-based learning experiences that are from the industries they are either in and seeking to upskill in, or are seeking to reskill to. And then they can take that to a current or future employer and show them that alongside the dinosaur of the transcript, that they have done the thing itself. And we already think we do a pretty good job with applied learning in the classroom, but this is really a way to give them access to work-based learning, because we know often a credential is not enough for our learners. It's the credential and the demonstrated experience, and this gives them access to experience, even if they're not on the job in that thing.
I
You know
love
what else
that.
I'd like to do, by the way, Doug? Call me crazy. I'd like to take work-based learning to life-based learning. To use IRS's terms, if you're the head of a household, there's a whole bunch of skills that we should be able to credential. If you're
100%.
a mom or a dad, and the whole bunch of skills we should be able to credential, and really thinking about the transferable skills, not just from the workplace, but from life.
Yeah, and enduring skills is how we try to talk about
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely, 100%.
And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody recently from University of Texas, El Paso, and they have a very highly, it's a Hispanic serving institution. The majority of their students are first generation. And one thing they do is they really formalize paying for experiential learning. So they actually like literally send people into workplace learning environments and pay to do that, rather than having students pay to have internships, right? So that so that they know that their students are getting that. So, okay. I have we're getting towards the end of the hour. Are there any last questions that people have before I ask a few a follow-up, if you have just anything? And I'm also thinking maybe we should take it to the Padlet. Oh, sorry about that, UTEP. It's true, but not for all degrees. Bummer. Anyway, let's take it to the Padlet, and just because this has been such an active chat, and one thing we're going to do is we're going to capture this whole conversation, which has been just fascinating, and integrate the wisdom of Doug and Jared with what we're hearing from our attendees. So if you could just go into question 2A and 2B and just kind of figure out, give some of your thoughts. I really love this idea. It's 2030. What's one feature you hope will define the learner journey at your institution due to current pathway efforts, or due to what you think needs to happen, or some of what you've heard today?
I'm still not, because I can't help myself. I think that's really interesting for me is
Yeah, please.
where, if I'm again trying to be provocative, I might argue that higher education really hasn't changed much since its inception 1,000 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And we're in a moment of time where I think we should and probably will have to adapt and change. And largely for me, what that hope means is all the things we're talking about, but really thinking about how we can more actively integrate industry and education together for the student, for the employee, for whomever that is. Like there is walls that exist that don't need to be there. I mean, the fun thing for me is, right, like as operating a professional school, we develop all of our degrees in collaboration with industry. I think every professional school will tell you that they do that. Okay, that's nice. But what's the next iteration? What's the next best thing? And even that is not so great, because I might pick on a company, I'm a life scientist, Pfizer, and I might develop my curriculum with these 10 people from Pfizer, Novartis, whoever. But these 10 people from the same company who aren't a different 10 people from the same company is going to be like, this isn't designed with industry in mind. This doesn't do anything I need it to do. So really taking down those walls and integrating us together, and the higher education in the companies, which also should mean that they have to do less teaching, because they spend a lot of their time doing training themselves, that a lot of it we could do for them, to really think about a more efficient system.
I love that. Doug,
highly
go.
agree. And I would say, and again, I can just say what Jared said, because we're very much simpatico here in terms of how we think and operate. But really, to I think your point, Jared, about you talk to 10 group of people, 10 people in one part of the organization, you'll get a different answer than you talk to 10 others. It's really being intentional about leveraging what we know from market and industry data about skills to validate what you're doing, and to then, and then that co-construction with industry becomes, as much as anything, a conversation about language and expectations, because we're often saying we're saying the same thing but using different words, and that's where a lot of this, I think it's largely more mythological than we think, but to the extent that it is real, this sense of disconnect between industry and higher education is largely because we're using different taxonomies and lexicons. And so one of the things that I think, Jared, when I hear you talk is helping us have a shared language. And then I'm going to go very much tactical and operational in terms of the 2B question and say it's 2030. University technology systems are just a disaster for this work. They are, I mean, all the different platforms we ask both students and faculty and staff to work on, they don't talk to each other. It's impossible to build a learner profile from all of these, disaggregated and incommensurable systems. And then we don't know how to meet the student because we don't know enough about their experience or their journey.
Right.
And that's, yes, there's a human dimension to this, and their advisor is going to be on with them, and their faculty member is going to be interacting with them, and the career services are going to be connecting. But there's some basic things we can know from all the different data points that we have about students that we cannot leverage easily in a CRM or a student success platform that can give us the ability to know, if I only have a limited amount of time in a day, what students should I be focused on? Because some students don't need us to reach out to them. They're fine. They don't want us bothering them. So just campaigning all students because you just want, that's not going to work. How do we find and leverage the technology that will help us meet those students where they are because we know enough about them? And we just don't. I mean, there are some places doing it better than others, but they don't tend to be the Northeasterns or the NYUs of the world.
No, and that is yes to all that, please.
Well, and I mean, it's not just, I mean, it's tough out there. And I'm glad that we didn't focus on AI in this conversation, but AI does exacerbate everything we've all said in this conversation. And it also presents opportunities that are there. So well,
here's the good news from my perspective, Carrie. AI will change the way we work, but it won't eliminate work.
No, but it will change jobs, change the jobs we have and what the job is and how, and that's going to be great. So one thing I just have to say, a last plug for our two wonderful panelists, which is that both of you are moving fast. And institutions, if there's one thing, a word of advice I have from supporting so many institutions, is move faster, moving too slowly. And, so if there's anything we can do, and oftentimes the School of Professional Studies that doesn't have as much of a tie to some of the traditional tenured faculty can move a little faster than other places. So if that's where you can do it there. So thank you both so much. Thank you all for participating. It's been great. And we'll be sending off the AI and enhanced notes from the session and really appreciate it.